Hello there, Sheryl here. Today is an extremely special day. I'm so grateful to have Maggie Chan Jones, CEO and founder of Tenshey. Maggie, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been a busy day for you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. It's great to be here.
Of course. Well, I feel like we're picking up a little where you left off with your interview with Gabriella Schuster and talking about allyship and sponsorship and the importance of that. And today, specifically, we're going to be talking about innovation. Innovation really from across the entire spectrum of an organization and how important that is, especially now at the time of year that we're in. But before we jump in, I thought I'd ask you a little bit about what inspired you to start your company, what inspired you to be a CMO. How did Maggie get to where she is today? In other words, did you have someone who inspired you to greatness, or sometimes people even have like a situation was difficult and then that was their motivation to kind of rise above it. So what's a little bit about your story?
Yeah, well, so I was born and raised in Hong Kong by my single mom and my widowed grandmother, and surrounded by my three amazing aunts. In a way, when I grew up, I really think that, my mom, my grandmother, and my aunts, they could do anything. So I always believed that women can do anything they want, as long as they put their mind and efforts into it. So, that has always been the inspiration to me in terms of always working hard, always, putting your focus on where your passion is. And, every step of the way, when I'm learning new things, I'm always curious about learning, about understanding how things work together. And marketing is really a combination of storytelling and I love technology on how technology can really change lives. That's how I ended up in marketing and tech.
That is really, really exciting. Did you have one aunt or your mom or somebody in particular that like specifically sparked something in you?
I would say not not for my corporate career or marketing per se, because um, my aunt and my mom were entrepreneurs, and I, funny enough, I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. And the fact that I decided to start my own company, Tenshey, almost 5 years ago now, which was totally coincidence. But it was great that I was able to get some insights from my aunt, who was who was a super, entrepreneur who started her own business in Hong Kong, and I get to learn a lot from her.
That is so amazing. So I think that's really important then, for anyone listening to think about what you're passionate about and what you love doing. And is there anyone, around you that can spark an interest or support you? Because it seems like you might have gotten a lot of inspiration from your aunt, this particular aunt, maybe even without realizing it, because you just saw what she was doing.
Yeah, that could very well be true. And I think that one thing that I really learned from my mom, my aunts, and my grandmother was they always worked hard. And, the work ethics was definitely something I picked up from them from very early days.
Yeah, well, it seems like with everything that you're doing and all that you're achieving, I imagine that your work ethic is there 100%. And so, well, before we get into our main topic on the importance of innovation and how to inspire it in others, can you share a little bit talking about work ethic? And even if we have, an amazing work ethic, it requires a certain mindset to either be a female leader in corporate or to start and have a really successful business. And so, as a coach and mental toughness and high performance, I always have to ask the question, what mindset has allowed you to see the success, that you've seen up to this point?
I think is really about seizing the opportunity. I mean, so often I think, sometimes we think about, oh, can I really do this? Like, do I have what it takes to get this done or to go for this opportunity? And actually, studies have shown that, as an example, men would go for a job opportunity when they're 60% qualified, where women in general don't go for the job until they are 90 to 100% qualified. So, for me, the important mindset is really about going for those opportunities, even though when, there's a little noise in, little voice in your head saying, no, you can't do that, but just go for it. Something that I always tell myself when I'm going for big opportunities is, okay, what's the worst that can happen? Like, you get a no, and is that bad? Right. So, when I can go through that, that conversation almost in my head, then I would just go for those opportunities.
And I think that is so important. And it reminds me, I just watched the master class for Richard Branson.
Mm.
And his motto reminds me a little bit. Yours is a little bit tidier than his. His is screw it, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so I thought I would, because when you have that opportunity, sometimes it's just thinking of how we want it to turn out.
Yep.
And just committing and getting some help. So I love that so much.
It's interesting you mentioned Richard Branson because, like, I remember seeing one of his quotes too that says, if somebody offers you an amazing opportunity, but you're not sure whether you can do it, just say yes, then learn how to do it later. And I totally agree. And I would say, learn how to do it very quickly so that you can really take advantage of that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think he actually borrowed that quote from Henry Ford. I've seen it a couple
Really?
times. And so, I mean, the greats all seem to think alike. So, including yourself, I'm going to lump you in there with those. With
You're
those.
too kind.
And so also too, if you don't mind getting a little bit vulnerable with us, I thought I would ask, have you ever felt doubt or fear and pushed through anyway? And the reason why I asked that question, and of course, after working with Olympians and some of the amazing female leaders across the country, is that I learned that everybody has fear.
Yeah.
And fear isn't a bad thing. It means that we care, right?
Yep.
But the difference between world-class performers and everyone else seems to be that world-class performers have fear and they push forward. So, and I imagine that's how you've been too. So, have you ever doubted yourself and pushed through anyway? And can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, to your point, you fear of failure because you care and because you're pushing yourself to your limit as well. And I think for me, I'll give you an example. When I first started serving on boards, that was really scary because, what was tough was, I felt like majority of board members are usually at least a decade older than I am, which also means they have way more experience than I do. So when I'm walking into the room as the youngest, board member at that table, I really wanted to ensure that, I can really bring the unique value into that conversation. And so, for me is first and foremost is telling myself that yes, you belong there, you belong in the boardroom, and you belong at this table. Then the second piece is, okay, then, what are these unique values that I bring to the table? Coming from the marketing and tech background, those are the experiences that I bring in. And also, in a way, coming in from a different generation actually give me a very different perspective. And, more and more board members are more spending more time engaging with employees. And I can tell you that, that part is something that I enjoy a lot. And, making those connections with the future leaders and the current executives are something that I spend a lot of time on as a board director.
Thanks so much for that. And I want to highlight something that you mentioned twice, and that was your unique value. So when we talk about innovation, I want to loop back to that as well, because a lot of times, to your point, and I think that you were actually in that pretty generous, thinking that women, like when you mentioned women need to check, have 60% qualified and men are, I mean, 90 to 100% and men are
Yeah.
60. I think men will go for it with 30%. I mean, they're just more likely to throw their hat,
Right.
into the arena. And I think what you said about your unique value, because
Mhm.
even as, you might be a decade younger going to a board meeting, but you'll also have, folks that are emerging leaders,
Mhm.
that are very new. But I think it's really important what you said about unique value, because everybody has it when it comes
Right.
to innovation. And
Yep.
so I want everyone listening to really remember that, whether it's among your peers or your leadership, to really do what Maggie says and get very clear on what your unique value is and have the courage to speak up about it. That's super important. And finally, last thing that I wanted to mention before we talk about the topic is you have an amazing book out called Decoding Sponsorship. And since in the world of high performance, we love talking about being proactive, and
Yep.
I love the idea of that book and helping others to learn how maybe to be proactive about being a sponsor or searching out one. So do you want to take just a moment to talk about the book and how it's really been transforming others?
Yeah, well, thank you. So the book Decoding Sponsorship is really about my own journey and also some of my friends, executives' journey on, their way to the C-suite and many of the stories on how do you cultivate sponsorships by first really understand internally within yourself on where you want to go. Where do you want to take your career? How do you build your career roadmap? And then along the way, how do you cultivate those relationships with leaders that are at a higher level than you who can become your sponsors? And when I became an executive myself, how do I sponsor others in the organizations? How do we continue to build a leadership pipeline that is diverse and inclusive? And it was such a fun journey writing this book and learning, not only reliving some of my own stories but also learning other stories as well. So hopefully people would also find some learnings and spark some new ideas for them too.
Yeah. So if you are interested in this space and how to have a more diverse and equitable workplace, and you haven't read Decoding Sponsorship, I cannot recommend it enough. I'm so glad that you took the time to put all of that down on paper. I know that it's not easy for sure.
Thank you.
And so, well, let's hop right in, because I think it's so, like I said, it's very timely. This is an important topic, but it's also very timely to talk about innovation in the workplace, because we're in a very different climate now. And hopefully, coming out of COVID, finally, some companies, COVID actually did good things for their business, and some companies obviously not so much. But either way, it feels like, or at least based on the leaders that I've been talking to, is that it is a time to really hunker down, think about how is 2023 going to be different? How are we going to
Yeah.
do things around here? And a lot of times, it seems like it's a really important time to think about how are we going to innovate to not just survive but thrive in the coming year. So can you share your insights on that, and how you're helping some of your clients and what you can share with the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, we are in a world that is changing so rapidly in the last few years, in terms of the way we work, in terms of, everyone as consumers, how we consume products, how we buy, everything is changing. So, innovations can really go from, how you work to what do you work on and how do you create better consumer experience as well. So from an innovation perspective, it also goes into for many companies is about that digital transformation, that the journey that they are on. So, it's so important. I would say any type of innovations have to start from the outcome. What is the outcome that you want to achieve? What is that customer experience that you want to have for your organization or even within your own work group? Like, how do you change the way you do work because of the different environment that we are in? And if we start from the end goal of where we want to be, then working backward on what needs to change, that is, that's going to give you a lot more ways to get people to kind of being your allies, as you will, right? And building that partnership to drive change.
So, starting with the end in mind, you are so talking my language right now. I like love this. And so, can you, let's say, maybe compare if there is a difference, or if not, let me know too. But between maybe a more established seasoned leader who's leading a large team, opposed to maybe a manager or a director who is really is going to need to innovate and who wants to innovate. Is it different based on your experience, the size of the team that you're leading, or some of the principles just really the same?
To me, I feel like the principles are the same, but your role may be different, right? When you're leading a big organization, leading change, more of what you do is around the communications of the vision that you have on where you want to go and how do you cultivate the organization to come with you. If you were leading a smaller team on driving that change on the ground, that is more about what are the things that you are working on and how are your key performance indicators are mapping to the bigger organizational goals, and how do you really drive those milestones every step of the way.
That seems so important. And we also were talking before we went live on what is the environment. And we're also talking a little bit about the yoga sound healing retreat that I was on last weekend, which kind of is kind of apropos,
Hmm.
and thinking about what mindset, in other words, what environment is innovation possible and not possible in. We had, I feel like, a really important conversation about that before we went live. So before we can talk about the strategy, based
Yeah.
on your experience, what is really important so we can position ourselves to be innovative and to use some of the amazing advice that you're talking about?
Yeah, Cheryl, I love the conversation that we just had, about really taking the time for yourself to be creative. Innovations is about new ideas, it's about breakthrough. So, how do you create that environment first and foremost for yourself, right? So I mentioned that for me, for the longest time, I know I am most creative and I have my best ideas when I am completely relaxed. And usually that means when I was on a vacation. So oftentimes, I actually, when I went on a vacation, somewhere else internationally, I would delete my email box, my work email box from my
Yes,
phone.
I love that.
Yeah, because I know when I have my emails on my phone, I'm just gonna look at them, and all these alerts that come in, it's gonna get me back into the work mode. So for me, if I took that away, and people know, of course, for any type of work emergency, they know how to find me. But outside of that, if I could be, completely unplugged, that's where my biggest ideas come into play. And, I know everyone is different, but really finding your way to be creative and safeguarding those environment is very key. And sometimes also, for me, I also know the different time of day is also more creative for me is in the morning. So I tend to, I may get up very early in the morning and start working, but my working was more about thinking time. Like, between 7 to 9 or 10 a.m., that's the time that I use a lot to kind of thinking about, not only about what I'm going to do for that day, but, what are some of the creative ideas that I may have, and before I go into all these back-to-back meetings.
Yeah, 100%. And if you're listening, think, well, first of all, I wanted to spotlight the deleting the email. So if you read James Clear's book, Atomic Habit, if you have that habit, which, and I wouldn't say looking at emails necessarily a bad habit, but maybe it's a bad habit when you're on vacation and trying to innovate. You have to make those as impossible, like nearly impossible. We can't, willpower isn't really a thing. And if it is a thing, it's diminishing. So that was so smart that you did that. And when it comes to, maybe not everybody has a week to take off, but even in your day, like you were saying, that morning time is really sacred. So is there a way to, have some tea or have your coffee and look out the window and just kind of decompress? It can be for a few minutes, a few days, a few weeks, whatever is appropriate. So it's really great to see. And I'm so glad that you are giving people a window into your ability to innovate and really encouraging them to find a way to do it, for themselves. And I know that you have a team retreat coming up. So is there a way that you help everyone innovate during that retreat?
Yeah, I love that my team and I are getting together in Connecticut, actually at my house on the lake. So that environment hopefully is already very inviting and giving us time to really reflect, and also time to really think about the future. To your point, we're in the last quarter of the year, really starting to think about what does the following year, 2023, going to look like. I think the other thing is creating that togetherness is important. I mean, in the last few years, obviously, with the pandemic, we couldn't get together a lot of times. So, taking advantage of this time that we can come together, I think when we can come together in person, we can actually really spend the time to be creative and thinking about big ideas.
Yeah, 100%. And so, last question I have, if let's say for leaders specifically that let's say are from 2 to 6 years from an exit. So they're really thinking about a legacy plan, a successor plan. In other words, so I'm going to exit. What do I want this place to be like when I'm not here anymore? Or how did I matter? How was it different? And so if you are a leader that is 2 to 6 years from an exit, and we're coming into kind of an interesting economic climate, have to make some difficult decisions, what advice can you offer as far as, innovating when you're coming down the home stretch in your tenure and you're at the same time coming into kind of a possibly a challenging economic climate?
Yeah, I would look at it in two ways. One, to your point about, when you are, a few years away from leaving an organization, you know, every role that I was in the corporate environment was, I always think about how do I actually work myself out of the role. What I mean by that is, what I wanted to get to was, the organization that I was leading should be so, streamlined, and the leaders are so ready to take on bigger responsibilities that I no longer need to be in that role. And I think as a leader, I also think that by doing so, I am also creating more room for the leaders that are rising as well, giving them more responsibility. So that's kind of how I think about, as someone who may be thinking about, the exit later on. And, I would also say for that person who's thinking about what's next, I think there are so many great opportunities now. And I've seen so many people, and myself included, when we kind of leave the, the corporate operating role, as you will, is to think about what truly matters to us, right? And thinking about what are your passion. For me, it, starting Tenshey, founding Tenshey was really my passion of how do I create, how do I contribute to a world where we can create more diversity and inclusion? How can I help more women, LGBTQ leaders, and people of color to, get to leadership positions and into the boardroom as well? And that to me was something that is important, that is connected to my own personal mission. And build, continuing to work on my board work is also, part of that plan. I have seen so many of my colleagues, former colleagues, building their next phase of career, building their portfolio career. And this is truly, I would say, it's like not a retirement, but it's truly a rewirement.
Mm-hmm. I think you might have to coin that hashtag immediately.
I definitely learned that from someone else. So it's spreading.
Yeah. So, and you are a perfect example of that. I loved your conversation with Gabriella Schuster earlier today. She's another great example of a rewirement for sure in a powerful way. And Maggie Chan Jones, I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. Congratulations again on your book, Decoding Sponsorship. And I really look forward to following you. And I just can't wait to see what's next. I'm sure it's going to be an amazing year.
Sheryl, thank you so much. It's such a delightful conversation with you.